Hello, and welcome back to the Rhetorical Reader. I'm Michael, and I am here to talk about all of the things that I read in the month of October. And it was a bit of a coming back to Earth month. I've been doing really great, riding high with a lot of 4s and 5s the last couple of months. And this month, I really felt like I had sort of more of an adjustment back to the mean. So we'll get to that. But first, I want to talk about a little bit of a failed project that I tried to do this month. So I wanted to create a video in October that was about my fall books, about the books that I thought of as really good fall books. And so in that effort, I went back and started rereading some things that I remembered as being fall books that I loved. And I discovered that maybe they weren't quite the books that I thought they were. And the first of those, the first book that I talked about is The Elfin Ship by James P. Blaylock. Now, I made an entire video about just that book, and I feel like it definitely still lives up. It's still the book that I believe it is, but I won't talk about it much here because, again, I did a whole separate video about The Elfin Ship and my love for that book. But two others that I read this month reread this month as part of that effort were Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury and A Fine and Private Place by Peter Beagle. And I want to take a second to talk about those two books and why I don't feel like they lived up for me. So Something Wicked This Way Comes is the story of two 13-year-old boys, Will and Jim, and Will's father. And it starts on October 24th when a dark carnival comes to their town. And Will and Jim get caught up in the magic and danger of the carnival. And Will's father has to figure out how to defeat the carnival and to save the boys. And all of that setup sounds amazing. And I remember loving this book as a younger man. But there are two things that I think when I look back on it after my reread that I really want to address. And one of those is I was struck again by the way women are treated in this book, because Will's mother is present in their lives and she is fully around and active, but she is not treated like a living character. She is a background object. And when Will and his father are talking about the dangers of the carnival and they're preparing themselves to take on those dangers, they make a conscious decision and actually discuss how Will's mother doesn't need to be involved or know anything about it because, well, that's just not a woman thing. I get it. I understand when the book was written. I understand who the book was written for, but it rankles. It really bothered me. And there's a second thing that I want to talk about with this book that I feel is sort of spoilery because it involves the resolution of the story. So I'm going to put this down and I'm going to just say that for the next couple of minutes I'm going to talk about the spoilery bit, and I'm going to have Squirtle hold a copy of the book over his head. And as long as that's there, I am talking spoilers. And when that goes away, I'll be done with that section. So I'm going to assume now that if you don't want to hear this, you're gone. In the resolution of the story, you find out that the carnival, this dark carnival, feeds on negative emotions. And specifically, one of the things that it most feeds on is fear. And so Will's father comes to the carnival planning to defeat it by not being afraid of it and by bringing joy to the carnival. And Will is struggling with that. Will is worried about Jim. Will is worried about himself. Will is feeling a lot of the things that young men feel, and he's afraid. And the way that Will's father chooses to get him focused and in the moment is to hit him in the face repeatedly and violently and to yell at him. And I couldn't process that the same way that I thought I did, that I must have before when I remember how I felt about this book, because the violence in that moment, the feeling that it engendered was just so upsetting for me, and I couldn't square with how that kind of reaction from Will's father and the way that Will feels about him would create the kind of positive emotions that were needed to defeat the carnival. And so I found it really upsetting, and that kind of violent reaction from Will's father was so out of character and so confusing to me when I was rereading it again that it really forced me to think to myself that I had to downgrade my memories of this book. And even though Bradbury's prose is still excellent, this just isn't the book for me anymore. I didn't love it the way I remembered loving it. And that's the end of the spoilers. So let's move on and talk about A Fine and Private Place by Peter S. Beagle, which I had a similar issue with, in the sense that while I still found things to love about the book, it definitely didn't live up to my memories of the book. And so A Fine and Private Place is the story of a man named Jonathan Rebeck who lives in a cemetery. He's lived there for 19 years. He escapes from the world by living in this cemetery, and he talks to ghosts. And this is not a mental illness kind of a thing. The ghosts are very real. They are active characters in the story, and other people can interact with them as well in the course of the story. And as usual with Beagle, I have to say that I always find Beagle's prose beautiful. But what bothered me about this book on a reread is that none of the characters are people that I could sympathize with anymore. The two ghosts, Michael and Laura, are two ghosts who are trying to hold on to their memories of what it means to be human. Because in this story, ghosts slowly lose what it means to be human and become these sort of empty memories that are all that's left behind when someone dies. And Michael and Laura have made the decision that they're going to try to hold on to their memories and hold on to their humanity for as long as they can. But what you find when you read it is that Michael is just insufferable, and Laura is honestly kind of a pushover who is only there to act as kind of a counterbalance and a foil to Michael, and to give him more purpose in the story. And Mr. Rebeck, his reasons for escaping from humanity and hiding out like a ghost himself in the cemetery, they didn't have the same resonance with me as an older man that they did with me when I was younger, and was sort of caught up in the romance of the story more than the details of it. And so as much as I, again, wanted to love this story, and as much as I remember loving this story, it didn't hold the same weight for me anymore, and I couldn't full-throatedly endorse it as one of my favorite fall books anymore. So that's what happened with those two, and honestly, I'm glad that I was able to salvage something out of those to make a video with The Elfin Ship, because that remains one of my favorite books of all time. But overall, my attempt at a fall books video kind of fell flat, and so I'm ready to just put that behind me and think about what comes next. And what comes next is the other books that I read this month, not related to the attempt at that video. I thought it was spooky season, so I should probably read at least one horror book, and for that I chose Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. This is my first Chuck Tingle, but I had heard nothing but good things about this story, and I really wanted to give it a try. It is the story of a Hollywood screenwriter who is told right at the beginning of the book that he needs to kill off the gay characters in his TV show that he's the showrunner for. And he refuses to do it. And then he begins to be haunted by all of the creations and creatures that are part of his backlog of movies and horror stories and things that he's told over the years. And it's quite creepy. It's quite upsetting. And over the course of the novel, we learn what's really going on. We learn how these creatures mean something to him as a writer and as a person. And we get a pretty strong resolution for a story that could have gone a lot of different ways. Overall, I found it to be really fulfilling. And even though this story starts off kind of choppy and I wasn't quite sure I was going to be able to get into it, by the end I was completely sold and I was really enjoying it. And I think that there's a lot of heart in this book. And so, again, I know nothing else about Chuck Tingle other than his reputation. This was, again, my first one of his stories, but I highly recommend it. It was a 4 out of 5 star read for me. And I think even if you find the beginning a little choppy, if you dig in, by the first third, there's a lot to sink your teeth into here, and I highly recommend it. So that is Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. After that, I've been continuing my delve into reading romance because I've discovered that I enjoy it. And so I picked up Something Wilder by Christina Lauren. This was another book that I heard a lot of people talk about, and it came highly recommended to me. And I will say that it's a really fun adventure novel, more in my opinion than it is a romance. It is a second chance romance that involves 2 women taking 4 men on a fake treasure hunt in the desert, which turns into a real treasure hunt in the desert. And that's pretty much everything you need to know to set the book up. One of the men who comes along on the trip is the ex of one of the women who's on the trip, and who's leading the trip. And you find that they both feel like they were abandoned by the other for various reasons involving miscommunication. And now it's 10 years later and they have a chance to rekindle that romance. Honestly, the romance takes a back seat in this book. It's really more about this story of the adventure that they're on, trying to find the lost treasure of Butch Cassidy. And I think that it would make a really good Netflix movie. Like, that's what I kept thinking as I was reading this, was like, this would make a really good Netflix movie. But I don't know that it really deeply impressed me as a book or as a romance book. There's nothing wrong with it. I would give it a solid 3 stars, and I would say that, it's fun. You'll enjoy yourself while you're reading it, but it won't do anything to elevate it beyond that and make it into one of your all-time favorites. So for a good little bit of escapism, I think that you couldn't go wrong with Something Wilder by Christina Lauren. So the last 2 things I want to talk about this month, I read a couple, again, sort of comic booky, pop culture-y sort of things. One of the things that I picked up was Legion of Superheroes, The Darkness Saga, or The Great Darkness Saga, which is, as you can tell from the cover, this is a story from the 80s and is a time when the Legion of Superheroes fought Darkseid. And that setup sounds amazing if you are at all a fan of DC Comics and know who those characters are. I've always been a fan of the Legion of Superheroes, and Darkseid is kind of the ultimate villain in the DC canon. But one of the things that this struggled with as a standalone graphic novel is that because it just picks up stories that are ongoing, Legion of Superheroes stories as it's told, the Legion is one of those soap opera super teams, very much like the X-Men and Excalibur and those sorts of things, where a lot of the interpersonal things that are happening between the characters take the forefront even over the adventures that are happening. And in this story, there's definitely a lot of story threads that are from before this event story happens and that are continued after this event story happens. And they really influence the way the characters are interacting with each other, and you don't see any of the setup or resolution of those in the course of this graphic novel, and it's distracting. It takes away somewhat from the ability to just enjoy this as a standalone. So again, I had fun with it. I really like the Legion, and this is a good story, but I would probably give it 3 stars as a standalone collection and just say, it's really cool, but it's difficult to just pull those stories out of their context and tell them by themselves. The last thing that I read in this month is an old Shadowrun tie-in novel called Nosferatu. And I picked this up at a used bookstore just for fun. I've always been a fan of Shadowrun. I'm going to try to explain Shadowrun in like 50 words or less. Basically, it's a role playing game world where it's a cyberpunk universe. But imagine that inside that cyberpunk universe, magic came back into the world, and suddenly elves and dwarves and trolls and orcs were living right alongside humans, and that magic was part of corporate America, and that all of the tropes of the cyberpunk world and all of the tropes of the fantasy world are sort of meshed together to work. And it doesn't sound necessarily like it would work perfectly, but it's a game that's been popular for a really long time and is one of, again, my favorites to play. I think that it does a great job of combining those two genres. But Nosferatu is the story about, set in this world where an ancient sort of evil has decided that it's time for humanity to be defeated. And so it creates a virus to do something to humanity. And along the way, this ragged band of heroes, led by an elven wizard named Saren Shamander, come together and do sort of a Mission Impossible style heist to pull this off and stop this evil from happening. I liked it. It was fun. It is, like I said, a licensed tie-in novel for Shadowrun, so you kind of have to know what you're getting into when you start reading it. The only thing that I didn't like about it is that this ended with very much sort of a Deus Ex Machina saving the day, as opposed to the heroes really being the ones who saved the day. So I'm never a big fan of that. I'd probably give it a 3 out of 5 stars again. It was fun. I enjoyed myself. I like getting to dip my toe back into the Shadowrun universe from time to time. But again, it does nothing that really elevates it beyond what it is. So that is my October reading list. I had a lot of fun with those, and even though there weren't quite the mass of 4s and 5s that I've had in the last couple of months, I didn't read anything I was disappointed with. I still really liked everything that I read, and I've already started my reading for November, and I think it's going to be a much stronger month. So that's it for me on this one. I hope that you're taking care of yourself. I hope that you'll all be good to each other, especially as it is election day when I am filming this. And otherwise, I will see you in the next one.